Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Majors Pre-Race Show. I'm Justin Prince. Alongside me today is Adam Lindgren and Peter Mackay. The Majors Pre-Race Show is the place to learn everything from the details for the last week of action to the storylines and previews for the upcoming rounds. Peter, I turn to you first. It was exciting action, to say the very least, for the 1987 Daytona 500 for the Major Series. Your thoughts on how things went down for all the Major Series races for its Daytona 500s for its last round?
Well, there was certainly a lot of yellow flag running, that's for sure. I mean, of course, these 1987 Cup cars, they're known as the fastest NASCARs of all time, certainly fastest speeds ever recorded in qualifying. And that certainly showed. There was a lot, especially in our region, which we were focusing on in the European region. A lot of drivers weren't overly familiar with the cars, and that certainly showed. I mean, they are a bit of an animal. They wander around, and we saw a lot of drivers having to take that spare car, and it was all about a race of patience, wasn't it? It was a bit of a marathon event, actually, going 500 miles, even in those cars capable of over 210 miles an hour. It takes a little while.
Absolutely. And Adam, the series, of course, getting ready to make its own history as well, to add to the history from the 1987 Daytona 500 with its first wildcard rounds. It's going to be a busy round, to say the very least, for all the teams in the Major Series.
Absolutely, especially for those teams that are that have teams in multiple regions. They're going to have a lot of work to do because we have three different races: the Bathurst 2-hour, the Masters of Formula 3 at Zolder, and then the Grand Prix of Long Beach with the Lotus 79 rather. It's going to be an epic battle to see who can come out on top in each of these, and to see which how each of these regions responds to each of these races. They're all very unique and very different, and all are going to have to require a lot of time and preparation. And for teams that are used to sharing practice time setups, things across regions where they have the benefit of having such a large team that's multi-regional, that's not going to be the case this time. Each of the teams in each of the regions is going to have to work hard on their own to develop their own setups, to develop their own strategies. And so this is, the wild card is a really cool thing because it gives the smaller teams an opportunity to be on the same level playing field as the larger teams. And I think we might see some shakeups here.
I think so too. And we'll get to that and more throughout today's show. But it's time to discuss what was an eventful round of action for the 1987 Major Series Daytona 500. But first, let's take a look at the highlights for the International Pro Split. After what was an eventful round, it's Cameron Dance who came away with the checkered flag and has a 15-point advantage in the point standings over Robert Northway. Adam, after what was a photo finish, he is the only person in the international side to go 2 for 2 so far. That includes the Daytona 2.4. A good start for Cameron Dance this season.
Yeah, a fantastic start for Cameron Dance. And quite frankly, I would expect nothing less from him than being at the front of the field, even in such a challenging car like those old Daytona machines. I mean, the old NASCAR cars are nothing to sneeze at. And I know that Cameron put in a ton of time to make sure that he was up there and ready to battle with battle with Northway and the other competitors in the region. One of the things that was really interesting was just the sheer amount of cautions. I think it was 18 cautions in the international region, and that race ended up taking a long time, somewhere over the realm of 3.5 hours. And that is a long time. That's a long time to be sitting in the cockpit. And for all of these drivers, especially with such an uncomfortable car at speed, I mean, the thing is on the edge all the time. And you could just see the wear of on the drivers' psyches as they continue to go through this race. The racing, at the beginning, it may have been messy, but it was fairly close and fairly contained, aside from the cautions that came out. But towards the end, like, the drivers were all over the place. And I think, due to the tire strategy and the fuel strategy that ended up happening towards the end of the race, that contributed. But also just, it's exhausting to run that many laps under caution, to run that many laps in that car at the Daytona 500. I mean, it totally makes sense as to why there was that many cautions, but it really separated the wheat from the chaff. And in the end, Cam Dance came home with it.
Absolutely. And keep in mind that it was one of the last major events for what is the old damage model for the 1987 cars. They're on a new damage model now as of a new build that's happened since that event. But earlier last week, I had the chance to talk to the race winner for the International Pro Split, Cameron Dance. Cameron Dance now joins me after an exciting Major Series Daytona 500 for him in the international region. First things first, Cam, it was an epic celebration after a drag race to the line, a very tight finish, while being seen in your rig and spinning off into the infield. Now that you've had time to think about everything, how are you feeling about how that race played out for you?
Yeah, I mean, the race from the start, I mean, I didn't expect to get pole at all. So that was pretty much just icing on the cake and showed that it was actually going to be a really, really good race to start with. So I knew leading into that race, with the fact that we got pole and the way that qualifying panned out for the entire team, it was actually looking like we were probably going to be in a really, really good spot for contention. And based on what I've done in the past and everything with the Gen 6 cars, I knew it was still going to be a lorry. There was still the fact that you had to get to the end in the last 50 laps or so. So I knew it was just a matter of being patient, biding my time, saving fuel, saving tires, doing all that sort of stuff that you would normally do. And yeah, in the end, it's pretty much paid off. We got into a position that we needed to be in, and with the fact that we had that final caution with about roughly 2 to go, it pretty much set us up to it was go time. There's no point sitting around. We've either got to go and risk it for a biscuit if there's a caution, or end up coming home second, which, either way, it was going to be a good result with the fact that we were top 2 or possibly even going to be top 3, but nevertheless, it was still going to be a really, really good points haul for us in the end.
Of course, we discussed things before the race. How do you feel things played out overall as the night went on? Because in some splits became where cautions bred cautions and strategy became the name of the game. How was it for you for the international side?
I think it was somewhat expected the race we ended up getting. I think the number of cautions was probably a little bit much for what I thought we were going to get. I thought we were going to probably have a little bit less, but I think in terms of the racing and the way it actually played out, it was probably a little bit better than what I anticipated, but at the same time, around the same sort of caution fest that we ended up getting at the same time. So it was a little bit of good and also bad at the same time, which isn't a bad thing. And I mean, I can completely understand it with who was racing and the fact that no one in the regions really had a chance to get to grips with the car too much apart from that entire week or so. So yeah, it was kind of understandable as to why we got the race we did, but at the same time, I mean, it was to be expected. And even in the other regions, you had guys losing it on their own and doing the same sort of stuff that the international region was doing. So it wasn't an isolated incident on its own as it was.
What else stood to you from your respective race as the night went on and the day went on, rather?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I mean, probably the main thing was just the way that everybody handled traffic and the way that everybody um, got used to the likes of restarts and that. There was a lot of variance in the way that everybody sort of approached the race, especially when we got to the end of the race, where even though it was starting to get to crunch time, everybody was still being reasonably patient, and everybody wasn't really doing anything silly. It was just a matter of unfortunate timings for a lot of people, and in some cases, it was not really their own fault as well. It was just the way that the car does what it does. So yeah, it didn't really seem to surprise me a lot what ended up happening, but at the same time, and with it being the Daytona 500 as well, it's a little bit of a lottery in that some respects. But yeah, for the most part, I think everybody sort of got their taste of the race in the end.
Now, it's the first wild card race weekend coming up for this upcoming round. And for you in the international region, it's the Bathurst 2-hour. What's kind of your thoughts on being able to run at Bathurst for what's expected to be a sprint race to try and go over to the mountain?
Yeah, it's going to be, I think, something a lot of us are going to be used to. I mean, we've all done laps around Bathurst at some point, whether it's in a GT3 or in an open wheeler or a V8 or something like that. So I think everybody in the region is going to be reasonably well used to Bathurst, obviously. So yeah, it's probably going to be a really, really good race. Hopefully there's no track blockages at somewhere like the Cutting or that, but we'll have to see what happens. And with it only being a 2-hour race as well, it's really going to be a sprint race, like you said, and that's probably only going to be about 1 or 2 stops, if that. So it really is going to come down to being very, very strategic in the way that you use your tires and possibly even be able to save your tires as well, so that you don't have to sit there for an extra 20 odd seconds. So yeah, it's going to be interesting, and especially with the fact that it starts at sunrise as well, so there's going to be a little bit of darkness for at least the first 10 or so minutes, so that's going to make it even more interesting with the fact that you're going to be driving based on where your headlights are showing. But yeah, I'm looking forward to it and seeing what's going to happen.
On that note, you mentioned a lot of the drivers taking laps there in the past. What's your preparation then like for this event, especially with many of the drivers potentially running the 12-hour just recently?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really, really good point. And the 12 hours probably actually helped, I think, majority of drivers who are going to be running this race, because the fact that they'll have that set up there, they'll have all the fuel numbers, they'll have the strategy, they'll know what to expect, especially if they started the race as well. They'll know exactly how much vision they're going to have and where they place the car and what the fuel burn and tire wear and everything's going to be like. So they'll be able to use that for the 2-hour race to their advantage. And it'll also they'll be able to use it as a stepping stone towards that setup as well. They'll be able to use what they learned from the setup, what it could be better, how it was worse, and then apply that to the 2-hour and have an even better car underneath them. So it's going to be really, really interesting. And then the other part you've got is that it's also going to be multi-class for the 2-hour as well, whereas the 12-hour was only single class with only GT3. So the multi-class of having GT4s on track is going to spice things up a little bit and really is going to make traffic management really, really important. But yeah, I don't imagine it's going to be too bad of a race, especially from a incident side, but we'll have to see.
So what car will you be running in, and what are your expectations for said car then?
I actually don't know. I'm kind of torn between running GT4 and a GT3 car. I ran the Audi in the 12-hour, but I'll have to see what happens. If I do go GT3, it'll be either the BMW or the Audi, but nevertheless, we'll see what happens. I mean, there's probably going to be a little bit of gamesmanship in terms of guys running classes they normally wouldn't, just to try and maximize point scores, but we'll have to see what happens at the end of the day.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before we let you get back to your preparation?
Yeah, just obviously good luck to everybody on the weekend. It's going to be a really, really good race, I think, in terms of all regions. I mean, there's some really, really cool regions. I mean, you've got the Lotus 79 at Long Beach, you've got the F3 at Zolder, and you've also got GT3s and GT4s at Bathurst. So yeah, it's going to be a really, really cool weekend. Hope everybody enjoys it.
Thank you very much for your time, Cameron.
No worries. Thank you.
Cameron Dance joining us. He was the winner of the International Pro Split for the Majors Daytona 500. Tim Klasson's coming away with the checkered flag in that one, Peter, and strategy was similar in that race where you had various different teams putting in different sequences depending on how the caution flags flew.
And that was the bit that was so unpredictable. That was the bit that was so hard to plan around, really, as we were starting to count down the race towards the checkered flag. And you couldn't really tell how many cautions there were going to be. Did you top it up with fuel? Did you try and gain some track position back? It was really enticing. And of course, that's the joy of the majors, isn't it? That even, there's going to be rounds across the season where perhaps one particular team or one particular driver has a speciality at a certain event. And I think for Tim Claessens to come through and get the win in a car that he told us, but by his own admission, wasn't one he was really familiar with at all. And might I add, I remember our chat in the commentary box, it was a Ford Thunderbird that won, which is which our producer will appreciate.
Absolutely. And of course, Tim Claessens with Grizzly TFR Daytona ended up coming away with the points lead. He ends up going 2 for 2 with Dallas Pataska 11 points behind. Pete Haran rounded out the top 3 for Team Mad inside the top 3, 19 points back. Who else impressed you in that race, Peter?
Well, actually, I want to mention somebody who was a little bit further back in the pack, but played it very, very sensible, and that was our very own Richie Hearn. Who commentates with us here on the Global Sim Racing channel. And Richie played it very, very clever. He's obviously raced on super speedways at the very highest level, but of course in IndyCar rather than in NASCAR. But you could just tell he was doing it really, really clever. And actually, if you looked at on the timing screen, he took way more pit stops than pretty much ever. I think he had the most pit stops by almost a factor of 2. Compared to the rest of the field. Basically, every time there was a caution, in he came, topped it up with gas, and round he went. Now, I'm sure we'll get to ask him about what he was thinking there, but I think he was just planning on letting these guys, have a punch up at the front and pick up the scraps as he went through, and he got a top 15 finish. So that was cool to watch.
Absolutely. It was interesting to see some of the various different strategies play out. And I got the opportunity to ask about some of the thoughts with one of the contenders throughout that race, VRS Satellite Racing's Dallas Pataska. He and I sat down and spoke about the race and his upcoming action. Dallas Pataska now joins me as we discuss what was an entertaining Major Series Daytona 500. For you, Dallas, how would you describe your race for the Major Series Daytona 500 for the European split?
Well, name of the game, that race was all survival. 200 laps and an old car like that you're really moving around all over the place. Even with the modern cars, the goal is to survive in a long race like that. So being able to get through with a good finish and relatively minimal damage is huge for saving that drop week for the oval side for sometime later in the season. Hopefully not really needed at all.
What was kind of your approach to try and make sure you survived and make sure you had the track position? Because it seemed like it was a race where it was one where you had a caution come out and our grouping of cars took the lead as a result of staying out. Yeah, an air caution, their cars, group of cars stay out. What was kind of your approach to that race?
Well, that's a great point. And it was hard to really pinpoint one specific strategy over another because of those cautions. So it was constantly a moving target. It was really just trying to pick your battles. When is the right time to go to the outside and make that pass, and when is the right time to just hold your cards and wait for the next caution. So it was really it went back and forth the whole race. I don't think I really had any set strategy. I know that once I picked up some damage after using my spare car, it was kind of, well, that's what I got, so I'm going to stay out and just see what happens. And I was able to escape through with just a few more incidents there before the end of the race. So, yeah, it wasn't really anything set in stone. It was just get to the end of the race, get to lap 200, and see what happened.
What was kind of the preparation like for that type of race? Because it's obviously a car that many people may in some cases have experience with, but others might not have the same experience to be able to build a car for. What was kind of the preparation like to prepare for that race?
Well, for a race like this, my preparation is usually a little bit different because of the kind of randomness that you can have at super speedway stuff with all the wrecks and whatnot. I took a little bit different approach in that I didn't really do much solo practice. I didn't do a whole lot of setup work. It was really just getting into rooms and getting comfortable around cars so that I knew what to expect and knew where the ultimate limits were in terms of passing on the outside and just what I can get away with, so I know where everybody's limits are, not only my own, but others as well that I'll be racing with.
Absolutely. And of course, the interesting mark comes into play now where the wild card rounds are starting to come into play. How does that impact you and your team where you have 3 different regions now with 3 different races to try and prepare for?
Well, yeah, that makes it very tricky, but we'll do what we always do. We'll just take it one step at a time and get one car ready, move on to the next one, and rinse and repeat until we feel confident going into the race. And once it comes up to race day, we'll go out there and do everything we can to bring home a good finish and move on to the next week.
What's your approach going to be for your wild card race as a result for the European region?
Well, ours is a tricky one, being at Zolder. It's not a track I'm super familiar with, and the Formula 3, I like the car, but it's got some weird quirks to it that I have to work through yet. So my expectations are a little bit lower than some of the other cars that are on the schedule, but ultimately the goal is to finish the race with a clean car, and that will provide me with a good points day to move on to the next round.
Is there anything else you'd like to add before I let you go and get ready for today for what's expected to be some big time action?
Yeah, I'd just like to thank you guys for inviting me out here, and like to give a shout out to Mike for inviting me on to be part of the Majors Garage coaching crew and everything, as well as everybody else over there that puts on all the behind the scenes work that makes everybody else look fantastic. And as well, you guys again with your broadcast, you do an amazing job. So yeah, that should be all from me.
Thank you very much for the time, Dallas.
Thank you guys.
That's Dallas Pataska. Came inside the top 5 for the Majors Daytona 500 for the European region. Christian Challenger came away with the checkered flag. It was his second victory of the season. He has a 7-point lead over Matthew Thornhorst as a result in what was a close finish, to say the very least, Adam, a nail-biting finish for Christian
Absolutely.
Challenger.
Yeah, it was super close for Christian. Probably closer than he wanted to. James Walker was the one he finished right ahead of, and it was very, very tight between those two drivers. But you could really feel that Christian definitely had the momentum and the way that he carried it off of 4. But it was such a tight race between all of those guys for that final restart. It was awesome to watch. And I don't think it's a controversial opinion to say that, the racing was some of the best we had in the Americas pro split. It was just so tight. The drivers were going 2 wide, 3 wide even at times, all the way around the track for the entire race. There was a decent green flag stretch we got, and then it was broken up by 20 lap runs with some cautions, and it ended up lasting a while as well, much like the other regions. But you could really get the sense that these drivers weren't just hanging on. They were really trying to push, and they had strategies. They had some guys were hanging back, waiting for the last couple of laps. There were guys right at the front. One driver who comes to mind is Boyd Hogan, who was just fighting up there constantly over the course of the race, and definitely made some people not so happy. I saw his name come up on the penalties list over the course of this week. But he definitely made his name stick out with the aggressive moves he was making around the outside throughout that race, and it was awesome to watch. But another important thing to note, Justin, is that even after all the chaos that happened during that America's race, even after jumping into these cars that are so new to pretty much everybody, it's important to note that the top 4 points standings folks, Christian Challenger, Matthew Thunhorst, Steve Driscoll, and James Walker, they have all scored top 5s in both the Daytona 2.4 and the Daytona 500, and that's no small feat.
Do you feel there are going to be people that are going to be able to stick up inside the top 5 throughout the season, then you feel, as your championship contenders?
Absolutely. Christian, Matthew, and Steve are ones that we're used to seeing at the top of the field. James Walker, we saw him do pretty well last season as well. The 2 top 5s here is a good sign that he's on track to keep holding that. But I mean, heading into this week's wild card round, I think everybody's holding their breath a little bit because, like I said earlier, there might be some shakeups. But some other names to keep your eyes on: Andrew Waring and Travis Warling, the two that we tend to mix up their last names. Sorry, guys. But they are often towards the front of the pack. Eric Smith and Nick Kuhn as well tend to be up there towards the front, though they have not had the luck in the past seasons go their way. So those are some names to keep your eyes on when we head into this race at Long Beach.
Some big names to say the very least, and some drivers that are going to be, you have to be ones to keep an eye on throughout that side of the series to say the very least. But you mentioned it, Adam, it's wild card round time. It's the first time in series history for 2021 where they'll have 3 different events for the 3 regions. The Bathurst 2 Hours will take place for the international region, the Masters of Formula 3 for the European region, and the Grand Prix of Long Beach for the American region. Peter, a lot of historical significance with those 3 types of races, to say the very least.
Oh, there certainly is. And I'll be selfish and start with the European guys at Zolder, which, interesting, Zolder is a circuit that kind of lives in the shadow of Spa-Francorchamps a little bit in the global scale. You know, everyone who's a race fan knows about Spa because it's on the Formula One calendar and has been for such a long time. But Zolder has got some great heritage as well. It opened in 1961, and it's very much a parkland circuit. Absolutely beautiful place to go and visit. And it was actually designed by the same gentleman who designed Zandvoort, and you can kind of see that in the flow of the circuit and the technicality of it as well. And actually, John Hugenholtz, who was the designer, was also the guy who was commissioned by Mr. Honda to build Suzuka, or to design Suzuka, I should say. So a pretty good CV for a circuit, Suzuka, Zolder, and Zandvoort. But the circuit itself has a brief history with Formula One and single-seater racing. Has always been a part of the circuit's life. Back in 1972, the Klein chicane was actually installed. Now, the Klein chicane is, I'm sure some of the drivers have a much more rude word for it. Take out Klein and put something else in, because it's difficult. It's really, really, really difficult. And you'll see a lot of action there, particularly in these F3 cars, when you think you can squeeze them through, and actually you can't. There's a horrible curb at either part. So I think we're going to be talking a lot about that in the broadcast. Now, that was put in 72 to slow the cars down in time for the Formula One coming in 1973. But when Formula One came for the first time to Zolder in 1973, they actually a lot of the drivers wanted to boycott the race because new tarmac had started cracking up and everything like that, and it was just a disaster. Now, they were going to hold a boycott, but then just when the race was about to start, Jackie X, local, who's now got a corner named after him at Zolder, got into his car and drove off. And all the other drivers looked at each other and got, I guess we've kind of got to do this now. So on the helmets went, on the gloves went, and off they went. And it was fellow Scotsman and sideburn enthusiast Jackie Stewart who went on to win the race. So that serves Jackie X for betraying his fellow drivers.
Wow, is to say the very least with that type of story. And it's going to be interesting too, I think, Adam, when it comes to the Bathurst 2 Hours, because there was already the 12-hour event for some of these organizations. Had talked to Cameron Dance about that a little bit. So there is a bit of crossover, but it's also going to be multi-class compared to the single class for the 12-hour event this year for iRacing.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and the multi-class, I mean, covering a multi-class series, the Camel GT series myself, like, it really does affect you. And especially at Bathurst, going up the mountain, if you get stuck behind the slower class and you're in the faster class, you are going to lose, 2 to 3 seconds just up one half of the mountain alone. And coming down the other side, lose another 2 or 3 seconds. So how they're going to be navigating traffic is going to be a big deal. And considering the fact that the 2 classes, their pace over the top of the mountain is not that much different. Like, it is 2 or 3 seconds, but at the points where you're trying to pass, the pace is not super different. You're going to see a lot of people taking some big risks, especially only in a 2-hour race. Like, 2 hours is not that long on the mountain. So that's good. It's gonna play a factor in the fact that this is gonna feel like a sprint race for most of these guys, and they are going to be going at it as hard as they possibly can. The international region is as proud as can be about Bathurst, and I mean, I'm sure Cameron Dance wants to take another, take his third win of the season, but he's going to have some pretty stiff competition because if there's any race on the calendar that the international region drivers want to win, it's this one.
Absolutely. And don't forget, there's the Grand Prix of Long Beach, where there's been several teams, keep in mind, Adam, too, for your side, for the American side, that have been practicing for days upon days just to make sure they're ready to go for qualifying.
Absolutely. And it totally makes sense why. I mean, Forge Racing Pro 1 and Evolve Sim Sports are only separated by 1 point at the top of the standings. And when you have 500 points available for a win in this series, that's nothing. I mean, 1 point is minuscule. On top of the fact that Kinetic America's Pro 2 is only 12 points behind. So, yeah, these teams are practicing a lot. The points championship is as tight as it's ever been going into round 3. Especially in the Americas region, where it tends to be a little bit more spread out because the teams tend to get a pretty decent stack of excellent drivers. But this year, it seems like that the talent is more spread out. And even with Christian Challoner's 2 wins on his belt and being last season's victor in the Americas Pro region, his team is struggling a little bit to keep up with his pace and to keep up with his consistency. And so that's making these other teams, double down because they realize that, Christian and his team have a weakness. And if they can exploit that weakness, they're going to be able to come home with the team's championship trophy at the end of the season. And the longer they can hang on, the season, it feels long on a calendar perspective, but as far as races go, not super long. So these drivers definitely, and these teams definitely trying to keep in touch with the Forge Racing Pro team and their excellent performances so far and their consistency being in the top 10.
On that note, Peter, your expectations overall for this weekend's racing action then for the first wild card?
Well, I think if you want variety, you've got it, and you've got a great challenge across all 3 races across all of the 3 regions. I mean, to talk about Long Beach, I mean, what an amazing addition to the iRacing service that's been. It's been something that's been in the works for such a long time, and it's such a special circuit to drive around. It really, in any car, but throw a ground effect Formula 1 car at it, wow. It's going to be very special for the drivers to take part in and to watch on GSRC as well. I mean, the Lotus 79, of course, was a car that took Mario Andretti to the World Championship. And Mario Andretti was the first American to win a Grand Prix in the USA at Long Beach. And it was also the first guy to win an IndyCar race at Long Beach as well. So everyone will be channeling their inner Mario Andretti there, that's for sure. With the F3s at Zolder, I think that's going to be a bit more crash bang wallet because the F3s are really good. They're a great car to get up to speed quickly in. They're really quite confidence inspiring, actually. They change direction beautifully. Of course, they're built by the amazing firm that is Dallara, led by Mr. Giampaolo Dallara, who's still at the helm of the firm, and he's now 84. And of course, what people don't know is that Giampaolo Dallara actually was one of the original designers of the Lamborghini Miura as well, which is to me one of the most gorgeous cars ever built. But he's very keen on sim racing. Dallara have been very helpful with iRacing, and he's also very keen on promoting young engineers in the company. And the product they make is world class. There is no equal to Dallara single-seater chassis. So I think the guys at Zolder on Sunday in the European region, they're going to have a lot of fun, and there's going to be some big dive overtaking moves because to make that move count at Zolder, you've got to be pretty bold and watch out for that. And then Bathurst, finally, I swear, guys, the Antipodean drivers, guys from Australia and New Zealand, I swear they find 2 seconds when they arrive at Bathurst. You go, where did that local knowledge for whatever reason is key. And no matter how many laps you do, if you've got an Australian or a Kiwi passport, you just take 2 seconds off your lap time. Maybe I should move.
Adam, your thoughts? Your final point?
I mean, I'm right there with you, Peter. It's going to be amazing to watch. The thing that I keep thinking about with Zolder is the F3 is so draft dependent, and that circuit is so technical. It's going to be really difficult for the drivers to find places to pass, like you mentioned. So that I'm right there with you. I'm expecting some extremely risky dives and some really grumpy drivers at the end of that one. I think it's going to be an intense race, and if anyone can break away from the pack and break out of the draft, I think you're gonna see, you know, if they can stay out front and if they can maintain and not make too many mistakes, especially on cold tires or late on in a stint, I think you're going to see them take that thing pretty handily. Now, with the Americas and the Lotus 79, that thing is a beast. And on a bumpy track like Long Beach, on a beautiful track like Long Beach, especially considering it's recently been completed by iRacing, which we've all been begging for so many years, and it's awesome to see it finally done, and it's so gorgeous. But you know, you can't look at the beauty for too long when you're racing the Lotus 79. That thing rattles around the track. It's so difficult to get your braking right. It's so easy to lock up the front tires, even to lock up the rear tires if you've got your brake bias set so that you're being very aggressive. I mean, there's a reason why it was such a legendary time in F1, and also, you know, it was a deadly time in F1 as well. And I think we're going to see exactly why when we come to the race on Sunday, especially when they start diving down towards the fountain section for the first time, taking that left-hander that pinches you off right at the apex. It's it's going to be exciting to see how many people make it through that turn alive.
It's going to be some fun action, to say the very least, but it's time to say goodbye. I'd like to thank you for tuning in for the Majors pre-race show today. For my broadcast partners, Adam Lundgren and Peter Mackay, for director Sean Ambrose, I'm Justin Prince saying so long. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you on the track for Major Series action. We hope to see you soon.